A sun-baked military base hosting a Veterans Day demonstration. Hundreds of spectators gathered to watch military precision shooting displays. A white general in crisp dress blues scanning the crowd, his eyes settling on a lone black woman standing quietly near the back. To him, she represents everything he believes doesn't belong in his military a civilian. Unassuming, an easy target for the kind of public humiliation that reinforces hierarchies and puts people in their proper place. He calls her forward. With practiced condescension, hands her a rifle, and invites the crowd to witness what he assumes will be an embarrassing failure. The microphone amplifies his mockery as he makes jokes about diversity and lowered standards. The audience shifts uncomfortably, but no one intervenes. This is how power operates, through the casual cruelty of those who mistake authority for superiority. What General Richard Caldwell doesn't know is that the woman he's chosen to humiliate is Staff Sergeant Maya Phantom Thompson, the most successful sniper in U.S. military history. What he's about to witness isn't failure. It's the reckoning that comes when assumptions meet reality, when prejudice encounters the very excellence it claims doesn't exist. This is more than a story about one moment of comeuppance. It's about the intersection of racism and sexism in military culture, about the systematic underestimation of black women's capabilities, and about what happens when someone with nothing left to lose decides to show the world exactly who they are. It's about the price of prejudice, the power of precision, and the moment when silence transforms into an unmistakable demonstration of supremacy that cannot be denied, dismissed, or forgotten. Most importantly, it's about understanding that behind every quiet person dismissed by those in power might be someone extraordinary, waiting for exactly the right moment to prove it. Maya Thompson's journey to becoming the military's most lethal sniper began in the rural mountains of Montana, where her grandfather, Sergeant Major James Thompson, had settled after 3 tours in Vietnam. James Thompson understood that survival meant being prepared for anything, and he began teaching Maya to shoot when she was 8 years old, not as a hobby, but as a discipline that would shape her character, focus her mind, and provide skills that might one day save her life. Growing up as one of only 3 black families in Glacier County, Maya learned early that excellence was not optional, it was survival. Her grandmother, Dorothy Thompson, had been one of the first black nurses at the regional hospital, fighting daily battles against colleagues who questioned her competence and patients who didn't want her care. Her father, David Thompson, worked as a park ranger, achieving respect through undeniable expertise in wilderness survival and emergency rescue. Her mother, Dr. Angela Thompson, commuted 2 hours each way to practice family medicine in Billings, often the only black professional in the rooms where critical decisions were made. The Thompson family understood that in predominantly white spaces, particularly in Montana during the 1990s and 2000s, every mistake would be magnified, every success would be questioned, and every achievement would need to be twice as good to be considered half as worthy. They taught Maya that preparation was protection, that skills spoke louder than words, and that sometimes the only way to earn respect was to demonstrate capabilities so undeniable that prejudice had no choice but to acknowledge them. Maya's natural talent with firearms was evident from her first lesson. While other children her age were playing video games, she was learning breathing techniques, calculating wind drift, and developing the mental discipline that separates good shooters from great ones. By 15, she was winning state-level competitions and attracting attention from military recruiters who saw in her the rare combination of natural ability and cultivated skill that defined elite marksmen. The decision to enlist came after the September 11th attacks, when Maya was 17 years old. Watching the towers fall on television in her high school's common room, surrounded by classmates who saw the attacks as distant tragedy, Maya felt something different, a calling to serve that went beyond patriotism to something more fundamental about duty, protection, and the responsibility that comes with exceptional abilities. Her recruitment process revealed the complex dynamics that would define her military career. While recruiters were impressed by her shooting skills, some expressed concerns about whether a black woman could handle the psychological demands of sniper training. Others questioned whether she would be accepted by predominantly male units, accustomed to traditional hierarchies. These concerns reflected the broader military culture of the early 2000s, when women were still excluded from many combat roles, and black women faced the double discrimination that researchers would later document in studies about intersectionality. In military service, boot camp at Fort Benning was Maya's first real taste of institutional discrimination disguised as tradition. Drill instructors who praised white recruits for the same achievements they criticized in her. Physical standards that seemed to shift depending on who was being evaluated. Social dynamics that consistently placed her on the outside of informal. Networks where real mentorship and advancement opportunities were shared. But Maya had been prepared for this by her family's lessons and her grandfather's stories about military service during an era of formal segregation. She understood that her success would require not just meeting standards, but exceeding them so dramatically that discrimination became impossible to maintain. She finished boot camp as the top marksman in her class, setting records in long distance. Accuracy that would stand for years. Sniper school was where Maya's natural talent fully emerged. The 29-day course that eliminated 80% of applicants became, for her, a demonstration of capabilities that even skeptical instructors couldn't ignore. Her final qualification scores shattered previous records, and her performance in field exercises demonstrated the kind of tactical intelligence and emotional control that defined elite operators. Upon graduation, she was assigned to the 173rd Airborne Brigade and deployed to Afghanistan, where she would spend the next 8 years earning the code name Phantom and establishing herself as the most successful sniper in U.S. military history. Over 300 confirmed kills, multiple distance records, and countless high-value targets eliminated with the kind of precision that became legendary among those who witnessed it. But Maya's success came with costs that extended beyond the obvious. Dangers of combat, the psychological burden of her kill count, the isolation of being often the only black woman in her units, and the constant pressure to prove herself worthy of respect she should have received automatically took their toll. In 2019, after a particularly difficult deployment where she lost several close friends, Maya made the decision to leave active duty and attempt to build a civilian life. She settled in Colorado Springs, near enough to military installations that she could find work as a private contractor when needed, but far enough from her military life that she could attempt to heal from years of service that had given her legendary status at the cost of psychological peace. November 11, 2022, Veterans Day. Fort Carson's annual public demonstration was designed to showcase military capabilities to families and the broader community. Maya had attended reluctantly, more out of habit than enthusiasm, wearing civilian clothes and hoping to blend into the crowd of several hundred spectators gathered to watch precision shooting displays, equipment demonstrations, and recruitment presentations. She stood near the back of the assembled crowd, arms crossed, watching younger soldiers demonstrate skills she had mastered years earlier. The autumn Colorado sun was warm on her face, and for a moment she felt something approaching. Peace until General Richard Caldwell took the microphone. Caldwell was everything Maya had learned to recognize and navigate during her military career. A career officer whose advancement had been smooth, whose authority had rarely been questioned, and whose understanding of military tradition was deeply intertwined with beliefs about who belonged in uniform and who did not. At 55, with silver hair and ribbons covering the left side of his chest, He projected the kind of confidence that comes from never having to prove himself to people who already considered him worthy of respect. Ladies and gentlemen, Caldwell's voice boomed across the demonstration area. What you're witnessing today represents the finest military tradition in the world. Precision, discipline, and the kind of excellence that has made our military the most effective fighting force in history. Maya listened with the weary familiarity of someone who had heard similar speeches countless times, usually delivered by officers whose closest approach to combat had been PowerPoint presentations in air-conditioned conference rooms. But something in Caldwell's tone, a particular emphasis on tradition and excellence, made her pay closer attention. Now, Caldwell continued, scanning the crowd with practiced authority, I know some of you might be wondering whether the modern military maintains the same standards that built our reputation, whether certain ... changes have perhaps compromised the effectiveness that previous generations established. His eyes settled on Maya, standing quietly in her civilian clothes, and something shifted in his expression. Here was an opportunity to make a point, to demonstrate something about standards and belonging that words alone couldn't convey. You, ma'am, he called out, pointing directly at Maya. Yes, you in the back. Would you join us up here? Maya felt the familiar tightness in her chest that came with being singled out in predominantly white spaces. Every conversation stopped. Every head turned. Hundreds of eyes focused on her as she stood frozen between the fight or flight responses. Her military training had drilled into her and the civilian reality that this was supposed to be a community event, not a combat zone. Come on up, Caldwell insisted, his smile growing wider as Maya reluctantly walked forward. Don't be shy. This is America. Everyone gets a chance to participate. As Maya approached the firing line, she could hear whispers from the crowd speculation about what was happening, nervous laughter from people who sensed something uncomfortable but couldn't articulate what it was. Captain Lucas, Caldwell's aide, watched from the sidelines with growing unease, his notebook ready to document what he hoped would be routine. Now, Caldwell said, handing Maya a standard M4 rifle, I'm sure you've seen these demonstrations and wondered if you could do what our soldiers do. Well, here's your chance to find out. We've got targets at 100, 200, and 300 meters. Think you can hit something? The condescension was unmistakable now. This wasn't about community engagement or military appreciation. This was about putting someone in their place through public humiliation. Maya recognized the setup immediately. Hand the civilian a weapon she presumably doesn't know how to use. Let her fail publicly, then use that failure to make whatever point about standards and tradition Caldwell wanted to make. Maya looked it. The rifle in her hands a weapon she knew as intimately as her own heartbeat. A tool she had used to eliminate threats from distances Caldwell couldn't imagine. She looked at the target's downrange, distances that represented warm-up shots for someone with her training. She looked at the crowd, hungry for spectacle, and at Caldwell, confident in his assumption that he was about to demonstrate her inadequacy. Before I shoot, Maya said quietly, I have one question. What's the furthest confirmed kill shot in U.S. military history? Caldwell's smile faltered slightly. I'm sorry? The record for longest confirmed sniper kill by a U.S. service member. Do you know what it is? That's not really relevant to 2,457 meters, Maya said, her voice carrying clearly across the now silent demonstration area. Afghanistan, 2018. A high-value target eliminated with a single shot under extreme weather conditions. The shooter was designated Phantom in official records. Caldwell's expression was shifting from condescension to confusion as Maya continued. The previous record was held by the same sniper. 2,382 meters, Iraq, 2017. Before that, the same sniper again. 2,156 meters. Afghanistan, 2016. Maya raised the M4 to her shoulder with movements so fluid and practiced that even amateur observers could see this was someone who had done this before, many times, at distances and under conditions that would challenge the most elite operators. The sniper who holds those records, Maya continued, settling into a shooting stance that was textbook perfect, was codenamed Phantom because targets would be eliminated before anyone knew she was there. Over 300 confirmed kills. Multiple congressional commendations for actions that remain classified. The demonstration area had gone completely silent. Even the wind seemed to have stopped as Maya aligned her sights on the furthest target 300 meters, a distance that would be challenging for trained soldiers and impossible for most civilians. "The thing about records, General," Maya said, her voice steady as she controlled her breathing in the pattern that had become automatic over years of high-stakes shooting, "is that they belong to someone who trained for years to achieve precision you're apparently unfamiliar with, someone who served with distinction while people like you were making speeches about tradition and standards." She fired once. The target at 300 meters snapped backward as the bullet found its center. "Someone," Maya continued, "working the bolt and acquiring the 200-meter target, who probably shouldn't be underestimated based on assumptions about who belongs in your military." The second shot was as perfect as the first. "Someone," she said, turning to face Caldwell directly as she lowered the rifle, "who goes by the civilian name Maya Thompson, but who you might know better as Staff Sergeant Phantom Thompson, retired." The silence that followed was complete and devastating. Caldwell's face had gone through several color changes as the implications of what had just happened began to register. The crowd stood frozen between shock, admiration, and the uncomfortable recognition that they had just witnessed something that would change how they understood both the demonstration and the assumptions that had preceded it. Captain Lucas lowered his notebook, realizing that what he had expected to document as routine military public relations had become something entirely different. The moment when one of the military's greatest legends revealed herself to an officer who had just made the mistake of his career. The immediate aftermath of Maya's demonstration created shockwaves that extended far beyond Fort Carson's demonstration grounds. Within hours, cell phone videos of her shooting performance and Caldwell's humiliation had spread across social media platforms, military forums, and news networks. But what should have been a moment of triumph quickly became the beginning of a campaign of retaliation that would test Maya's resilience in ways that combat never had. General Caldwell's public humiliation had been witnessed by hundreds of people and recorded by dozens of phones. For a career officer whose authority had never been seriously challenged, the experience was psychologically devastating. But as Maya would soon discover, Caldwell's humiliation was compounded by a personal element that made his desire for revenge far more dangerous than simple wounded pride. 3 days after the demonstration, Maya received an unexpected visit from Colonel Eleanor Brooks, her former commanding officer, and the woman who had mentored her through her most difficult deployments. Brooks had driven from the War College, where she now taught, to Maya's Colorado Springs apartment, bringing news that would explain everything that followed. "Maya," Brooks said as they sat in Maya's modest living room, "there's something you need to know about Caldwell. Something that explains why this isn't over." Brooks explained that during Maya's 2018 deployment to Afghanistan, one of her targets had been Staff Sergeant Michael Caldwell, General Caldwell's son, who had been caught selling weapons to Taliban forces and had been designated for elimination after standard capture attempts failed. The shot that killed Michael Caldwell had been one of Maya's longest-distance kills, and the mission had been classified at the highest levels to avoid the political complications of a general's son being executed for treason. Caldwell never knew the details, Brooks continued. He was told his son died in combat, heroically. But after your demonstration, he started asking questions, calling in favors, accessing classified records he shouldn't have been able to see. He knows now, and he wants revenge. The personal dimension of Caldwell's animosity explained the systematic campaign that began within a week of the Veterans Day demonstration. Military contractors who had been offering Maya consulting work suddenly canceled their agreements. Her Veterans Affairs benefits were placed under routine review that delayed payments indefinitely. Most disturbingly, her military records were being investigated for inconsistencies that could potentially result in loss of her security, clearance, and veteran status. But Caldwell's most devastating weapon was his access to classified information and his willingness to manipulate it for personal revenge. Using his position and connections, he began leaking selective details about Maya's classified missions to journalists, always providing just enough context to make her look like a war criminal, while omitting the legal authorizations and strategic necessities that had justified her actions. The media campaign against Maya was sophisticated and relentless. Stories appeared questioning whether her kill count was exaggerated, whether her missions had violated rules of engagement, and whether the military's most successful sniper had actually been operating outside legal boundaries. The coverage consistently used photos of Maya in civilian clothes rather than her military portraits, emphasizing her race and gender while minimizing her achievements and honors. Maya found herself trapped in a nightmare familiar to many veterans having her service questioned by people who had never worn uniform, having her sacrifices minimized by those who had never faced enemy fire, and having her motives attacked by those who had never risked their lives for anything beyond their own advancement. Psychological impact was devastating. Maya had survived multiple combat deployments, had eliminated threats that saved countless American lives, and had served with distinction under conditions that broke lesser soldiers. But the systematic destruction of her reputation by someone, using the very system she had served to protect, was more demoralizing than any combat experience. Sleep became impossible as Maya replayed every classified mission, wondering which details Caldwell might leak next and how they might be twisted to support his narrative. Her appetite disappeared as stress consumed her physically as well as mentally. Most isolating was the realization that many of her military contacts were avoiding her, unwilling to risk their own careers by association with someone under investigation. But Maya had not survived years of combat and institutional discrimination by surrendering when things became difficult. She began documenting every canceled contract, every delayed benefit payment, every leaked story that correlated with information only Caldwell could have accessed. She reached out to military justice advocates, civil rights attorneys, and journalists who specialized in investigating military corruption. Most importantly, she maintained the physical and mental discipline that had made her legendary as a sniper. She continued her daily fitness routines, practiced meditation techniques learned during counterinsurgency training, and maintained the situational awareness that had kept her alive in hostile territory. She understood that this was a different kind of war, but it was still war, and she intended to win it. The breakthrough came when Captain Lucas, Caldwell's aide, reached out secretly to Maya through Colonel Brooks. Lucas had been documenting Caldwell's increasingly erratic behavior and his abuse of classified information access. As a career officer, with his own integrity, Lucas was disturbed by what he was witnessing and willing to provide evidence of Caldwell's misconduct. "He's lost control," Lucas told Maya during a clandestine meeting at a Denver coffee shop. "He's accessing classified files he has no business seeing, leaking information to journalists, and using his position to conduct what amounts to a personal vendetta. I've been documenting everything because I knew someone would need proof eventually." Lucas provided Maya with copies of Caldwell's record access logs, recordings of phone conversations with journalists, and email chains that showed the deliberate coordination of the campaign against her. Most importantly, he revealed that Caldwell was planning to release fabricated evidence digitally manipulated, video footage that would appear to show Maya committing war crimes during her Afghanistan deployment. Maya realized that passive defense was no longer sufficient. Caldwell's willingness to fabricate evidence meant that simply documenting his misconduct would not be enough. She would need to take aggressive action to expose him before he could destroy her completely. The war hero who had spent years eliminating threats to American forces was about to become a different kind of warrior, one fighting for her own survival against an enemy who had access to all the resources she had once served to protect. Maya's moment of decision came when the fabricated war crimes video went viral across social media platforms and cable news networks. The deepfake technology was sophisticated, showing what appeared to be Maya executing captured combatants in violation of Geneva Convention protections. The video was accompanied by leaked classified documents that appeared to corroborate the footage, creating a narrative that the military's most decorated sniper was actually a war criminal whose actions had been covered up by a corrupt command structure. The public reaction was swift and brutal. Protesters gathered outside Maya's apartment complex, demanding her arrest and prosecution. Death threats flooded her social media accounts and voicemail. Veterans organizations that had previously honored her service began distancing themselves from association with someone accused of war crimes. Most devastatingly, the Department of Veterans Affairs suspended all her benefits pending a full investigation. Maya watched the coverage from Colonel Brooks's safe house in the mountains outside Colorado Springs, where she had taken refuge when the threats against her became credible and immediate. The woman who had faced enemy fire without flinching was now confined to a hidden location, watching her reputation and life's work being systematically destroyed by someone using technology and institutional access to wage a war she couldn't fight with traditional weapons. "We need the original footage," Brooks said as they reviewed Lucas's intelligence about Caldwell's evidence fabrication. "The real video from your Afghanistan missions. It's the only way to prove the deepfakes are false." The problem was that the original classified footage was stored in a secure facility at Fort Marshall, Virginia, under security protocols that made unauthorized access virtually impossible. The files were classified at levels that required multiple authorizations to view, and any attempt to access them without proper clearances would result in immediate arrest and federal prosecution. But Maya had not spent 8 years as a military sniper without learning skills that extended beyond marksmanship. Special operations had taught her infiltration techniques, surveillance methods, and tactical planning that could be adapted to non-combat scenarios. If the legal system could not provide access to the evidence that would clear her name, she would have to obtain it through other means. The mission planning took 2 weeks. Maya and Brooks studied the Fort Marshall facility using satellite imagery, security protocols obtained through Lucas's intelligence network, and shift schedules for security personnel. They identified a 12-hour window during a facility security upgrade when normal protocols would be temporarily modified, creating the opportunity for unauthorized access. The infiltration itself required skills Maya had not used since her active duty deployments. Moving through the Virginia countryside under cover of darkness, avoiding security patrols, and penetrating a secure military facility demanded the same combination of patience, precision, and tactical intelligence that had made her legendary. As a sniper, the classified archive facility was protected by multiple security layers. But Maya's years of military service had given her detailed knowledge of the systems and protocols. Using access codes provided by Lucas and security vulnerabilities identified during their reconnaissance, she reached the digital storage area where her mission footage was archived. Copying the files required 4 hours of careful work. Downloading terabytes of classified video while avoiding detection by automated monitoring systems. Every sound could trigger alarms. Every unexpected access log could result in immediate response by security forces. Maya worked with the same controlled focus she had used during her longest-distance shots, understanding that a single mistake would result in immediate capture and federal prosecution. The files she obtained provided irrefutable proof of Caldwell's deception. The original footage showed Maya's actions during her Afghanistan deployment were not only legal, but had prevented Taliban forces from executing captured American soldiers. The classified documents Caldwell had fabricated were immediately revealed as false when compared to the authentic mission records. But Maya's vindication required more than just obtaining evidence. It required making that evidence public in a way that could not be dismissed or suppressed. Working with investigative journalists, military justice advocates, and civil rights attorneys, she coordinated a simultaneous release across multiple platforms that made Caldwell's manipulation impossible to deny. The press conference where Maya presented the authentic footage was held at the National Press Club in Washington, D.C., with Colonel Brooks and Captain Lucas standing beside her, as she methodically dismantled every element of Caldwell's fabricated narrative. The contrast between the deepfake videos and the original footage was immediately apparent to even casual observers, revealing the sophisticated but detectable manipulation that had been used to destroy her reputation. General Caldwell used his position and access to classified information to conduct a personal vendetta against a veteran whose only crime was embarrassing him in public. Maya said, her voice carrying the same steady authority that had made her legendary as a sniper. He fabricated evidence, leaked classified information, and attempted to destroy the reputation of someone who served this country with distinction for 8 years. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Within hours of the press conference, Caldwell was suspended from his position pending a full military investigation. The fabricated videos were removed from social media platforms, and news networks began issuing corrections and apologies for their role in spreading false information. The sniper who had spent months under siege had achieved her most important victory, not through elimination of a target, but through the patient, methodical exposure of truth that rendered her enemy's position untenable. The military tribunal convened to judge General Richard Caldwell lasted 3 weeks and became one of the most closely watched military justice proceedings in decades. The evidence Maya had obtained from the classified archives, combined with Captain Lucas's documentation of Caldwell's abuse of authority, created an irrefutable case of misconduct that shocked even seasoned military observers. Caldwell's defense team attempted to argue that his actions were motivated by legitimate concerns about military standards, and that Maya's shooting demonstration had revealed security vulnerabilities that required investigation. But the systematic nature of his campaign against her, the fabrication of evidence, and his misuse of classified information access made it impossible to portray his actions as anything other than personal revenge pursued through abuse of military authority. Tribunal's verdict was unanimous and severe. Caldwell was stripped of his rank, dismissed from service without honors, and sentenced to 5 years in military prison for violations of the Uniform Code of Military Justice, including abuse of authority, mishandling of classified information, and conduct unbecoming an officer. His military pension was revoked, his awards and commendations were rescinded, and his name was removed from the various installations and programs that had been named in his honor. More importantly for Maya, the tribunal's findings triggered a comprehensive review of her case that resulted in complete vindication. The Department of Veterans Affairs restored all her benefits with full back payments. The Department of Defense issued an official apology for the harassment she had endured, and Congress passed legislation strengthening protections for veterans who report misconduct by senior officers. But Maya's personal vindication was only part of a broader transformation that her case had catalyzed. The publicity surrounding Caldwell's misconduct had exposed systemic problems in how the military handled discrimination complaints, protected classified information, and investigated allegations against senior officers. Her courage in fighting back against institutional retaliation had inspired other veterans to come forward with their own stories of misconduct and discrimination. The Maya Thompson Foundation, established with financial support from veteran advocacy organizations and civil rights groups, became a national resource for veterans facing retaliation for reporting misconduct. The foundation provided legal assistance, investigative support, and public advocacy for veterans whose service had been questioned or whose benefits had been threatened because they challenged institutional discrimination. Maya herself emerged from the ordeal as more than just a vindicated veteran. She had become a symbol of the possibility that individuals could successfully challenge institutional abuse when armed with evidence, courage, and community support. Speaking engagements took her across the country, sharing her story with military audiences, veteran organizations, and civilian groups working on civil rights issues. Her testimony before Congress about discrimination in military service led to legislative reforms that strengthened protections for women and minorities in uniform. Her advocacy for improved mental health services for veterans resulted in increased funding for programs addressing PTSD and military sexual trauma. Most significantly, her willingness to speak publicly about the intersection of racism and sexism in military culture helped validate the experiences of thousands of other veterans who had faced similar discrimination. The transformation of Fort Carson, where her original confrontation with Caldwell had occurred, became a model for military installations nationwide. New policies required cultural competency training for all officers, established independent oversight for discrimination complaints, and created mentorship programs specifically designed to support women and minorities in military service. 3 years after the shooting demonstration that had started everything, Maya returned to Fort Carson for the dedication of the Phantom Veterans Memorial Center, a facility devoted to supporting veterans who had faced discrimination and retaliation. The ceremony was attended by hundreds of veterans, military leaders, and community members who had followed her story and drawn inspiration from her courage. Standing at the podium where General Caldwell had once mocked her, Maya spoke to a crowd that included many of the same people who had witnessed her original demonstration. But now she was not the anonymous civilian being publicly humiliated. She was a recognized advocate whose voice carried authority earned through struggle and validated by victory. "This center represents more than my personal story," Maya said, her voice carrying across the assembled crowd. "It represents the understanding that institutional discrimination can be challenged and defeated when individuals have the courage to fight back and that community support necessary to sustain that fight." The facility that bore her Cody name would serve veterans for generations to come, providing legal assistance, counseling services, and advocacy support for those facing the same institutional retaliation that Maya had successfully overcome. Her legacy would not just be as the military's most successful sniper, but as the veteran who proved that even the most powerful institutions could be held accountable when confronted with truth, evidence, and unwavering determination. Today, when we discuss discrimination in military service, we often focus on policy changes and statistical improvements, while overlooking the human cost of systemic prejudice and the individual courage required to challenge institutional abuse. Maya Thompson's story forces us to confront the reality that excellence and service are not always enough to protect those who challenge the assumptions of people in power. The intersection of racism and sexism that Maya faced reflects broader patterns of discrimination that affect not just military service members, but women and minorities in every professional field where authority is concentrated in the hands of those who mistake their position for proof of superiority. Her experience demonstrates how quickly institutional protection can be weaponized against those who dare to reveal the gap between stated values and actual practices. Maya's story is ultimately about more than discrimination. It's about the power of preparation, the importance of documentation, and the necessity of courage when confronting institutional abuse. Her years of military training had given her not just the skills to be an exceptional sniper, but the discipline and strategic thinking necessary to wage a different kind of war against an enemy who controlled many of the traditional weapons of institutional power. Most importantly, her victory demonstrates that individual courage, when supported by community solidarity and armed with irrefutable evidence, can successfully challenge even the most entrenched forms of institutional discrimination. The changes at Fort Carson, the legislative reforms, and the thousands of veterans who found inspiration in her example prove that personal resistance can create systemic transformation. The next time you witness someone in authority attempting to diminish another person through public humiliation, remember the quiet woman who stood at the back of that Veterans Day crowd. Remember that assumptions about who deserves respect, who possesses expertise, and who belongs in positions of influence are often more revealing about the person making them than about those being judged. And remember that sometimes the most profound victories come not from eliminating targets at impossible distances, but from the patient, methodical exposure of truth that makes prejudice and abuse of power impossible to sustain.